Welcome into the Illini Inquirer Podcast. It is Monday, so it's time to catch up with J Leman. No Illinois football game to talk about, Jay. So today's going to be a little fun. We're just going to kind of throw a lot of stuff at you, so I'm excited about it.
I like that. I have no idea what's coming, so let's do it.
Well, first of all, we got some bad injury news to talk about. We knew about this after the Minnesota game. I think we talked about it a little bit last week, but Dylan Rosiak, a linebacker I know you have a lot of respect for, out for the season. Not specific what the fracture is, lower left leg, not sure if it was ankle or whatever, but obviously a big loss for the Illinois defense. And this time of year where you start having some of these injury attrition issues. So how does this impact the defense, Jay?
Well, I think by far Dylan Rosiak was the most productive and consistent linebacker you had. And one of the things about linebacker is they're the people that kind of sew the defense together from the front seven to the back four, right? And so not having him in there, and a chief signal caller, one of probably the top communicator on that team as far as what the call is, it's going to be a big shift. And so you hope he gets better. Prayers to him that he does get better and recovers fully. Won't speculate an injury. He just won't be back. Hopefully he's back sooner rather than later. But I think as far as schematically, you're going to have to see James Kreutz, Ryan Mead. We saw Malachi Hood, but you also might see more one linebacker sets in there. Xavier Scott in there more at nickel, and then having 5-6 defensive backs in there, or maybe 5 defensive linemen, 5 defensive backs, and 1 linebacker, which we've seen at times from Aaron Henry.
What have you seen from James Kreutz? I know Ryan Mead, I thought he had his best game against Minnesota. And then Malachi Hood has shown some flashes to me. What have you seen from those 3 guys?
Well, I think James Kreutz, he reminds me of a guy that certainly has the frame, the pedigree, and the length that you want in a linebacker. I honestly think that he has been forced to be an every down linebacker a little too soon in his career. I think he's great in sub packages. We've seen him flash in sub packages as a blitzer. We've seen him flash when, in a sub package, a lot of times you have one thing to do and you can focus on that as a young player. Like, okay, this is what I'm doing in this package. And the whole weight of a defensive game plan isn't necessarily on you. I think when you get to that level of playing the whole game or the majority of the snaps, it is a different level. And let's not forget, he had a banged up hand, it looked like, cast-wise early in the season. I think that affected him as well. I think Ryan Mead has been solid. You never see him making MAs or missed assignments and whatnot. I think he's very solid. 6th-year player, has been solid on special teams as well. Not flashy, but he does give you some girth in there where we really struggled a little bit with having some size. Kreutz is not that big of a guy. Dylan Rosiak, not that big of a guy. Malachi Hood, although could be a big guy at some point, is not currently. And so you're like, okay, can we get some physical presence in there? I think Malachi Hood, who was a pretty good recruiting get early for Brett Bielema, he's a guy I think you can build on. I think these reps are going to be invaluable down the road for him.
I forgot to mention, Aaron Henry mentioned Kenenna Odeluga. We got to see him come in sub-package. We know him as a pass rusher. And that JoJo Hayden, who's not a linebacker, more outside linebacker now, but that those guys could play a little bit more. And Aaron did mention today, Jay, that they found out that their sub-packages maybe have been their best, most efficient defense here recently. So what do you kind of read into that?
That's interesting, right? And you do a little self-scout, a little self-analysis, and you say our sub-packages are probably our best. And for those that don't know, sub packages would probably be 5-6 defensive backs on the field. And so that's a nice way if you read between the lines and say, hey, when our linebackers on the field, we haven't played all that well. And it's been obvious. I mean, if we were to grade out the positions week in and week out, in that defense, probably the linebackers have graded out probably less than others. I can't say that was the case last year. I thought the defensive backs really struggled last year. The defensive line has been the strength, in my opinion, obviously the last 2 years. This year, it's gone back and forth between the defensive backs and defensive line. Neither has been very stout at times, but that's reading between the lines. We're struggling at linebacker. I think I don't know what you've seen. I just read the updates from you, but it seems like linebacker is a recruiting priority.
For sure.
It seems like they're like, we got to get backers. You see that more than I do. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, that they need to go get some more size, some more athleticism. They're going for some high school kids. I expect it to be a priority in the transfer market because you hope Dylan Rosiak comes back fully healthy with a year, right? But that weak side linebacker position, they need an upgrade. right?
Oh,
As they bulk up James Kreutz and Malachi Hood and some of these other guys.
well, here's the thing, and the weak side is it's tricky because you got to be athletic enough to kind of get outside the box in 10 personnel when, you're 11 personnel, sometimes you're outside the box. And when they split that tight end out, but you also got to be beefy enough to get in there and be able to stop a counter or a power when they run right at you. And we've been railroaded sometimes on counters and powers. You think about the Kansas game. You think a little bit about some of the other games, even against Purdue. They got into that double bone formation, and our backside linebacker, our weak side linebackers, not able to fit the gap. And so it's a unique position. We got to be able to do a lot of different things.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of like some of the profiles of those guys. Like they had Calvin Hart before he got hurt, and that seemed big, athletic. It just they need more playmakers at that second level, Jay.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about a weak side linebacker, you've got to have some twitch to you, and you've got to have some size to you, and you got to be able to hold up against that number 2 receiver in space. Sometimes you have a little bit of both, and sometimes defensively you can make up for it. I mean, I think about our 2007 defense. Antonio Steele, 210 pounds at weak side linebacker, had a lot of pop for his size, but could really cover a lot. But then you pair him up with me and Britt. Britt could run and be on the line of scrimmage, and I was more physical inside the box, but couldn't cover anything, right? I mean, nobody ever called me a blanket, I can tell you that much. But that combination, you can cover for people, right? And that's something that I think you have to do as a coach. What are the matchups we can do? We don't have studs at every position. One thing I've always thought that schools that we aspire to be like, whether it be Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan State, one, they recruit players for certain positions and then develop them for that. But they also pair up their defense to cover for different positions as well. So they're only asking them to do something that they know they can do. Some of the defensive schemes we've done, whether it's a talent gap or a schematic gap, and there's a train going through the background here because I'm in the middle of Central Illinois here. Some of that is, are we asking guys to do stuff that they just can't do at this point? It's not a knock on them. And I think you have to ask yourself that as a coach. I ask myself that all the time coaching 7th graders, with a college perspective. I'm coaching 7th grade football players, and they're continually not making the play, right? And so you're like, what's going on? Can I help them? Well, are we asking them to do something they can't really do? And I think that's a question you have to ask as a coach and put your players in the best position to succeed.
Yeah, and that's what that self-scout was all about. And Jay, I asked for some listener-submitted questions, and one of these hits on this. So I'll just get into it now. Tim asked, does Aaron Henry have the personnel to call the defense he wants? Like, would his defense be more man and blitz heavy? In second, so what do you think of that? Like, I don't think like there's some NFL players here,
sure,
but there's not that many. Like last year, I thought, you don't have Johnny Newton, you don't have Keith Randolph, you don't have Denzel Jackson. Like that team was probably more talented. We know 2022 was loaded with NFL talent. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times we've always made the joke, and it's Ron Zook famous line. It's not necessarily the Jimmys it's not the X's and the O's, it's the Jimmys and the Joes. And I think it's a combination of both. I think there's been times when Aaron Henry has called great games. I think there's been times where he wants a player or two back, just like any coordinator has, right? I don't think that they're able right now to run the man coverage that Aaron Henry wants to run. On twofold. One, they've been, I wouldn't say a revolving door because it's 3 or 4 people that play corner, but it seems like they haven't been able to stay on the field consistently for a game. They've been a little bit banged up. It kind of messes up the rhythm, right? I do think Matthew Bailey is a great player. At times on tight end matchups, it's been difficult because he's had some tough matchups. I think Miles Scott, although a very instinctual player and I believe a good free safety, he lacks size a little bit in the run game. And sometimes when you're in man coverage and everybody's looking around and he's the one free guy, that's your last tackle or line of defense. That can be difficult sometimes when that's your guy. Not to mention, if you're going to play man coverage, you better be able to cover for, you can only cover 3-4 seconds max. We haven't been able to get consistent pressure to help on that. So the answer to that question is, I don't think we have all the players there to call the defense that Aaron Henry wants to play. But that's where great coaches come in. That's why Curt Cignetti is so famous right now, because it is widely known, at least people think, that Indiana doesn't have the talent level to be 10-0, but there is an X factor that has made them 10-0. And that's why he's getting the praise he's getting right now.
Yeah. So that kind of goes into Aaron talks about it all the time, putting your players in positions to succeed.
Sure.
And one area they are struggling mightily at, Jay, is third down. And you've
Sure.
mentioned that could be due to first and second down not
Right.
going so well. But they're third to worst in the Big Ten in third down conversion percentage for opponents at 46%. That's
Sure.
You're just not getting off the field that way. He did say that during his self-scout, he found out that their third down and first down looks are too similar. So I don't know what you make of that, but what do you think is the key to more third down success?
So again, the whole being on schedule and off schedule thing is important, right? I mean, that's key. I think there's a couple positions that are key. I think weak side linebacker and your nickel are key on third down because you're going to be guarding the inside receivers, whether that's a tight end or a slot receiver. And many times we saw this last year in Barry Lunny's offense, but you'll see a lot. The slot receiver, that number 2 receiver, is the easiest throw for a college quarterback to make. And usually it's the most favorable matchup if you look at that. And so what you're going to see in the pass game, your nickel get attacked. Xavier Scott, for as good a year as he's had, has been banged up at times. There's been inconsistency at that position because he's been out. I also think at weak side linebacker, we've talked about that, right? I can tell you from a guy who played weak side linebacker his first year or two, when you're out of position, and you're getting asked to do something you can't do, it doesn't matter how good your technique is. Sometimes you just get out athleted in space. I've been there. And so I think that position has to play better. I also think that we, on the extreme short yardage, we've got to get a better interior push from the defensive line. I do think Dennis Briggs has played well. I think T.R. Edwards has played well at times, but it's more based off of movement and less off of, hey, I'm going to grind you out right now and get a push so that this 3rd and 1.5, you're not going to convert. We don't have that to rely on. And when you do that, you have to rely on movement, which sometimes works and oftentimes doesn't work if you're moving out of the gap or where the play is going. And so I think those are the 2 biggest things, along with staying off schedule or staying on schedule for the offense, off schedule for the defense, that have really inhibited Illinois' third down success.
Sweater weather pairs perfectly with savory fall foods, but with your busy schedule, sometimes it's hard to eat the way you'd like to. That's where Factor comes in. Their chefs do the shopping and chopping to bring you fresh, never frozen, fully cooked meals right to your doorstep. All you have to do is heat and eat. All their meals are dietitian approved, so you know you're getting the nutrition you need along with the fall flavors that you crave. And when it comes to meals, everyone wants the same thing, options. That's why Factor offers 35 wholesome meals every week, including Gourmet Plus, Keto, Calorie Smart, Vegan, and Veggie, so you'll always find something you love that suits your lifestyle. And there's more to Factor than just lunches and dinners. From easy breakfasts and smoothies to delectable midnight snacks, Factor has over 60 plus add-ons that keep you fueled and focused 24/7. And with a plethora of flavors, you'll never get bored. This fall, you've got a lot going on outside the kitchen, so keep your plans and turn to Factor. They deliver fresh, nutritious, chef-prepared meals ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So head to factormeals.com/Illini50 and use code Illini50 to get 50% off your first box and 20% off your next month. That's code Illini50 at factormeals.com/Illini50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. Aaron Henry was a little bit more forthcoming in some of the things they learned. Barry Lundy didn't say much about the self-scout, except that they went through it. Jay, what do you think they found during their self-scout of the offense during the off week?
I think they probably found that their majority of explosive plays through the air go through 2 guys. Captain Obvious right there, Zachary Franklin and Pat Bryant.
They're pretty good.
Okay, how do we get them the ball? But also, how do we get Colin Dixon, Tanner Arkin, Canary Wilcher the ball in pivotal times as well to kind of spread that out. But I think what they saw is that, one, that's what they saw as far as big plays. They're not running the ball great. That's obvious, especially in the interior. I think that's probably one of the reasons Barry Lundy didn't say anything, because that was pretty obvious, okay? Number 2, when Luke plays good, we've got a high probability of winning when playing against a common opponent at talent-wise. No question. So the priority has to be is, 1, what do we have to do to ensure that Luke Altmaier plays well? It's related to a run game. It's related to protection, which is all related to the offensive line. Again, football, the ultimate team game. I can't just give one reason. But what do we got to do to keep, one, Luke Altmaier healthy, two, have him play well? Because if he plays well, we're going to be in the game in the fourth quarter. They were in the game against Minnesota in the fourth quarter, and they didn't particularly play well. I think these next 3 games are going to look very similar to what a Nebraska game looked like, to what Purdue looked like, to what Minnesota looked like. We're in that echelon of teams. And so I think when you look at the self-scout, how can we make Luke Altmaier play better?
We got a submitted question here, Jay. ILL guy said, why has the offensive line development been so poor with Illinois? Brett was critical of the last staff's O-line classes, but he hasn't exactly performing well. Is it a coaching or recruiting issue on the offensive line?
Boy, that's a loaded question. Thanks, ILL guy. I appreciate the question. Was that the tag name? So say what you want about the recruiting. I've seen Wagner post this. The 2018 offensive line had 5 NFL players. It's Palczewski and Doug Kramer and Kendrick Green and Nick Allegretti and Vidarian Lowe. And so they brought some guys in, and some of those guys played probably too early, but got great experience from that. I'll just be frank. It seems to me the evaluation the last 3 or 4 years of the offensive line hasn't been great. We would have seen more players, a Joey Okla, a Clayton Leonard, or someone break into that starting lineup. Kreutz and Geske, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they were Lovey fines, right?
Yeah, that was that kind of lost class in between Bielema and Lovey. Yeah.
Now we've hit on some portal guys. I think Isaiah Adams, great portal guy. Chrysler at times has been a portal guy more earlier in his career than later. And so we've definitely hit on some players in the portal. And I do think that the coaching maybe took some of those players that were here to the next level as far as the scheme and technique goes. But I think when you look at the recruiting of Illinois, and just being honest, to say that there isn't one high school recruited offensive lineman yet in year 4 starting or playing significant time for Illinois, that is unacceptable.
Brandon Henderson, the one. Just to throw that out there. He's the one. But you're at 2022 class. I don't think there's going to be a guy, Jay, out of those 4, understanding it's COVID class, but out of those 4, I don't think any of those guys are going to end up a starter. Whitenack started a couple games, but he's redshirting, it looks like. So I can imagine he might be elsewhere after this year. You haven't hit anybody in that first class.
We haven't seen one be a full-time starter yet. Yeah. There's been some times they have some playing time, so thank you for correcting me on that. But to me, that's just unacceptable for the brand of football that we want to play. And I believe because of that, we're seeing a difficulty running the football, controlling the clock, getting play action, staying on schedule. And so when we look at where we need to recruit better, you'd have to say offensive line and linebacker are what we when to recruit better. We haven't recruited that bad on the defensive line. We've had players. And so anyway, that's kind of my hard. It's hard to say that, but it's the reality right now. Right.
Yeah, it's fair. Whipple sent this in. He said, question, are Lunny and Altmaier learning how to score more points, be more effective? Do you need 30-plus points to win in the Big Ten? Jay, you said they needed to play this way entering the season. The defense maybe has been a little bit better than that.
Right.
But I look at these last 3 games against 3 of the worst 5 offenses in the Big Ten. I'm leaning into my up-tempo. I'm leaning into my passing attack because I don't know if these other teams can score 30-plus points. So what do you think of that?
Well, we knew coming in that if we could score 30 points, I thought that we would have a good chance of getting 7 to 8 wins. That was coming into the season. When we've scored 30 points or been close to it, we've won every game basically. I mean, you look at our offensive output against Penn State, against Oregon, wasn't great. Obviously, those are more elite defenses, but they've got Barry Lunny had a really good first 6 games. I think Luke Altmaier had a really good first 6 games. I think the offense has been average to below average the last 3 games. Some of that is the quality of defense they're playing, no question. Some of that is Luke just hasn't played as well from an accuracy and ball security standpoint. And a lot of it comes down to, and I just hate to rag on the offensive line, is when the offensive line doesn't necessarily perform like you want them to perform, I don't care who's calling the plays. It's
Right.
just not going to work. And so how do we do that? How do we make a change? Hey, let's go up tempo. Let's get the ball out quicker. Let's kind of have a John Paddock-esque offense like we had the last 3 games. We're going to wing it around. We have some receivers to do that, and we believe that we're playing teams that don't have an offense that can make us pay if we have a 45-second possession here and there. Our top running backs out, what gives us the best chance to win these last 3 games? And that's what I believe can happen. They've got to get to 30 points. I don't care if they don't win the time of possession. They got to get to 30 points. If they get 30 points, they're going to win these next 3 games.
What injury do you think has had a bigger impact, Jay, for the offense? Is it Caden Fagan, who we thought could be the bell cow and just can outrun some offensive line mistakes? Or is it a guy like Cole Rusk in the passing attack that gives you maybe a different option at tight end?
Well, that's a good question. Cole Rusk is an intriguing pick because you feel like Henry Boyer is about a year away, right? You feel like Carson Goda a year away from maybe being another option. I don't even know how many years Goda has.
This don't go to his only year, but good thing you have him just because he's the only guy that's kind of the receiving option.
It tells you how much I know about Carson Goda. My bad, but you kind of feel that, and so a guy like Cole Rusk who's really productive, that would have been great. I still think it's Caden Fagan because Caden Fagan was a guy we saw it in the Penn State game. Penn State had him dead to rights on that 60-yard run. He made a guy miss. And we just don't have a lot of guys that will make people miss. Now, Josh McCray did break 3 tackles on that 42-yard touchdown run against Minnesota. Khalil Valentine's going to be good. Aiden Lawfrey has picked it up in the second half once he's gotten healthy, but we're really missing that dynamic running back that can make up for some of the mistakes. So I would probably say that injury is most critical, and I believe, unfortunately, Dylan Rosiak is going to be the biggest for the defense.
Yeah. All right, Rob sent this question. What will it take for Illinois to finish the year strong, Jay? How can they avoid fizzling out like in 2022? And I would add 2023. You lose 2 games at the end by a combined 4 points to keep you out of a bowl game. Of course, you've made a bowl game. You got to make the most of this 6-1 start.
Sure. Well, Brett is big on not living in the past, but he doesn't even remember the past. And if this is not a point in meetings, I would be shocked, right? And I mean, everybody knows you don't want to belabor stuff to your team. But you want to you have to know that's on their mind. And so you want to address things that are on their mind. And so how do we do that? I mean, if it was me, I would do an up-tempo offense, number one. I'd put the ball in the hands of my best players. Right now, my best players are Luke Altmaier and the 2 wide receivers that we have. Those are our best football players. I got to get them the ball. I don't care if everybody in the stadium and every defensive coordinator knows we're going there. We got to get the ball into our best hand. But we've got to take our offensive line and put them in a position, like we talked about earlier in the show, to succeed. If that's quick game, that's quick game. If that's outside runs, that's outside runs. Whatever it is. If that's draw plays, which we had success against Michigan on, that's draw plays. Whatever it is to give us some kind of success to succeed. If that's screen plays and getting them out in the open where it's not a traditional pass protection, maybe a tailback hide screen, maybe a wide receiver screen, whatever it may be, how do we get them, give them an opportunity to succeed? And defensively, we have really struggled against really good teams with big plays. We've struggled against bad teams in getting off the field on third down. We got to get off the field on third down. And I still think special teams, for the most part, in most games, we've won the special teams battle. We're certainly not a bad special teams but there's been times where it's been a little bit iffy.
I know you guys have heard me talk about Homefield Apparel a lot, but there's a reason. I have some of these shirts from Homefield Apparel, and they are a premium collegiate apparel brand based in Indianapolis. And what I love about them is they're focused on creating incredibly comfortable, officially licensed apparel with vintage college designs. So go to homefieldapparel.com and check out their Illini gear. The Flying Illini t-shirt, I love. If they have any bomber jackets, go check those out. But you see all of these vintage designs that are great. They kind of stand out in a crowd, but also these are comfortable, well-fitting. They're not the boxy kind of ones you get at the random department store. No, these are well-fitted, comfortable t-shirts and apparel. So go check it out at homefieldapparel.com. Go to the drag down menu, click on Illini, and you'll see all of these great shirts, including Orange Crush, old school Fighting Illini basketball shirts, the Flying Illini t-shirt with the great winged logo, Script Illini gear, including t-shirts, hoodies, an orange ringer tee, the 2004-05 Illinois basketball shirts so you can relive those glory days. But also, they have great hoodies, great crew necks, great Illini football gear, including the 80s Illini helmet on there. If you're an old school sweatshirt guy, they got those. If you're a quarter zip guy, they got those. If you want a women's tank there with the script Illini, they got that. So go to homefieldapparel.com to check out all the great gear they have there. If you're not an Illini fan, they have more than 180 plus growing list of schools. So you can check out all the gear from all over the country. And right now, use code Illini24 for 15% off at homefieldapparel.com. That's Illini24 for 15% off all the gear at homefieldapparel.com. So this Michigan State matchup is really intriguing to me. They're number 14 in scoring defense, number 15 in scoring offense. Of course, Illinois feels a little wounded coming into this game, Jay. Their quarterback, Aiden Childs, really talented, big arm, and he can run, but he's young. And he's thrown 11 interceptions, which leads the Big Ten. You're familiar with this defense. I kind of like this matchup because I feel like your defense can force some turnovers. It's just you're not confident in Illinois the last couple of weeks because they haven't played really good ball. So just what do you think of this matchup? What are the keys for Illinois?
Well, first and foremost, let's zoom out a little bit and look at other former Big Ten West teams. I mean, Iowa goes on the road and loses to UCLA, who's not a great football team. They're certainly getting better. Minnesota goes and loses pretty handily to Rutgers. I mean, I know it was kind of a game there with 4 or 5 minutes left. Basically, Rutgers beat them as bad as Minnesota beat us, basically. And so you're like, okay, well, it's not the end of the world that you have a loss or a trip up down in November. It's how do we prevent this from being a pattern? I like the matchup against Michigan State. Here, you got to zoom out too. This is the first year for Jonathan Smith. He's still in massive rebuilding mode. And you're going to see them make mistakes, turnovers. They're going to make dumb errors. So many things that we are accustomed to in the 2010s from Illinois. That's what you're going to see from Michigan State. They have some athletes, though, that can overcome some of that stuff, especially on the back end, especially at quarterback. Michigan State, when you look at them throughout their history, have always had athletes. Always. Can they put it all together is the question. So on any given day, Michigan State has been able to play with teams they probably shouldn't play with, and they also lose the teams that they probably shouldn't. Now, Jonathan Smith is trying to be more like Mark D'Antonio, who under him, they had a level of consistency they had not seen. But under John L. Smith, even under Nick Saban, the great Nick Saban, and certainly under Mel Tucker, they've always been a team that could beat anybody or lose anybody, and that's what Jonathan Smith is trying to change.
Nolan sent this one in. How close is Illinois to being ready for top 15 games? 1 to 2 more years before we can expect to compete or even win games against Oregon, Ohio State, or is that still a few years away?
Or Georgia, the team we're paired up with in the Citrus Bowl matchup.
I still feel like Georgia finds a way to get into the college football playoff.
So as close as as much as we want our team to be a top 15 team, we're just simply not. And I'd love to go on the sideline. Jeremy, you've been on the sideline a couple of times, and I've been on the sideline with top 15 teams. And as the Young Bucks say, they're built different. Like you can see a difference when you look at them. It's not just junior football. You can actually see a difference in college football. They have a different level of athlete. I think what's encouraging from your reports, Jeremy, is we're starting to get some of that different level of athlete on our campus for recruits, right?
For me, Jay, it's like Illinois has a few of those guys, right? They don't have too deep of them.
Yeah, I should say, because there are a few of those guys. I think what was interesting about the 2007 team is that we had some legitimate NFL talent on that, and that allowed us to play above and, beat top 5 Wisconsin. We beat number 1 Ohio State. We were right there with Missouri, right? We weren't right there with USC. They had a lot more talent than us. But, I think we're missing some of those explosive plays, right? Or explosive defensive players that can just shut down things. We had a little bit of that on the defensive side, I should say, 2022, and we saw what that did. So I think that makes a big difference. But here's the deal. You can actually compete with some of those teams that have better athletes if you have more experience and great coaching and the fundamentals are there. You don't beat yourself. And so experience can kind of trump talent over time.
Yeah, Jay, like Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon. They're still at a different level. Like Michigan's still getting that talent. We'll see what happens with them in the years ahead with Sharon Moore. But those are still at another level. But what I find interesting in this Big Ten is the parity with the rest of it.
Oh my gosh.
You know what I mean? Like you just said it, like Minnesota losing to Rutgers. Like Minnesota's a better football team, but any game, like it feels like in that next tier to 4, 5 through 17 in this league, everybody outside of Purdue, and even Purdue, is competing a little bit with Illinois and Northwestern. Like it's just kind of a huge toss-up because of the portal, because of NIL, and because of all the changes teams are going through.
100%. I mean, you really do feel like there's 4 teams that have been top-notch: Penn State, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon. And then 5 through 17, anybody can beat anybody on any given night. The most shocking to me is that I know it was a short week on a Friday going out to California, but Iowa losing that game. Did not see that coming, And as frustrated as we are about our offense, I can tell you they're equally as frustrated with their offense at times as well. Sometimes it just doesn't show up. I'll take Iowa State. Iowa State lost 2 in a row, one to Kansas, going outside the conference, lost to Kansas 45-36. It was never really that close. No. They were up 18 in the fourth quarter against a Kansas team, which has had a lot of close losses. And this is a team that people said was a dark horse playoff contender even up until last week. And so I think all these Midwest kind of teams and Big Ten teams, they're all, and I guess West Coast and East Coast now with the Big Ten, they all are kind of in that same boat.
Who is your most disappointing team in the Big Ten so far, Jay? The 3 candidates, like I'm kind of disappointed in Iowa losing 2 of their last 3 to teams that aren't very good, but Michigan, Nebraska, USC would seem to be those. I mean, Purdue fans would probably raise their hand at this point now.
I think USC and Michigan. I thought Maryland would take a step back with Tolia, leaving. I thought Penn State would be what it is, second fiddle to Ohio State. Ohio State or would be a cup of tea. I thought Washington would lose a lot. So all that. I was also disappointed in Wisconsin. I thought that possibly they would maybe show themselves to be a top 3rd team. And to be a top 3rd team, you have to be top 6. I considered us a top 3rd team through the first 6 games. I don't consider us that now. We have a chance to be a top half team for sure, depending on how we finish. But you got a lot of teams in there. Like you said, they're just right. I would say Wisconsin's pretty disappointing, but Michigan's defending national champs to what they are now. I know they lost a ton and the head coach and a 1st-round pick, but man, didn't make some great offseason moves for sure.
Wisconsin's 8-7 in the Big Ten under Luke Fickell. It's kind of like feels like an identity crisis right now for what are they going to be moving forward, Jay?
I mean, this is a Wisconsin team that, under Barry Alvarez won 3 Rose Bowls. Brett Bielema went to 3 Rose Bowls. And then Paul Chryst had runs where they were undefeated for 9-0, 10-0, oftentimes late into the season, really owned the Big Ten West for a majority of the decade that the Big Ten West actually existed. And they did it with the old Wisconsin model. Mm-hmm. You're trying to change that model. You have a Big Ten coach in Luke Fickell who, certainly has the pedigree, being a D coordinator at Ohio State and taking Cincinnati to the playoff, one of the, most desired coaches in the cycle there for, 2 or 3 years. And so I'm confused when I see it. I just don't know if you can run air raid and get the speed to Madison that you need to be effective in air raid. Yeah. I think that's the question.
I'm a fan of Matt Rule. I love that he actually cares about the trenches and tries to play Big Ten ball a little bit.
Great soundbite coach too, man. He at least says something of value and kind of gives you inside the back doors of coaching.
Yeah, but they've lost 3 straight, and they're now facing at USC, home against Wisconsin, at Iowa to end the season. They have 5 wins right now, Jay. Every time somebody picks Nebraska as this breakout team, I go, have we not watched them since they've been in the Big Ten? But I am a little surprised.
7-0 before they played Ohio State, right? Then they lost to Illinois and a bunch of different people.
I'm a little surprised like that. This could be really hard for them to get to bowl eligibility in year 2 for Matt Rule. Yeah. Maybe they can beat USC. Maybe they can beat Wisconsin or Iowa. I mean, none of those teams I think should feel very comfortable against Nebraska, but this was a big rebuild and it's taking more time maybe than even they hoped.
Guys, Nebraska, according to one Big Ten coach that I've spoken to who has really, really close ties with Nebraska, he tells me, and he's competed against Nebraska for years, did not coach there, but played in the same coached the same conference, coached in the Big Ten. He told me this: Nebraska will never be what they were in the 1990s under Tom Osborne. He said with recruiting and non-qualifiers and different things, he did not believe in present-day college football they could get the Jimmies and the Joes they needed to Lincoln, Nebraska, especially with the rise of different programs in that area. You know, you're competing against Iowa for similar type player. You're competing against Kansas State in that region. Colorado now picking it up. Oklahoma's always gotten whoever they wanted, right? He just said it's just never going to happen again. He believes they're going to be a decent Big Ten football team of 7 to 8 wins a year. This whole thing that they're going to have 10 wins and be in the playoff, it could happen every 7 or 8 years. It's not going to be consistent. I think Matt Rule is a good football coach. So does this individual I'm talking to. He just doesn't think it's possible on where they're at. Their days as a football juggernaut are over. I'm talking like Paul Feinbaum now with my doomsday stuff, but it largely people in that Nebraska bubble or grew up when we did, when Nebraska was winning national championships, still believe that can actually happen. And I just don't see that happening anytime soon when you look at the roster. I know you paid millions of dollars for Raiola to get there and be your quarterback. You're going to need more pieces to the puzzle.
Yeah, and I mean, I love that area, but do recruits. I mean, it's a long way away. They got a bunch of NIL. They got a good coach. I think if your expectations are we can be Iowa or Wisconsin, Jay, I think that's great. I think that's very, very possible. I don't know if Penn State is within the realm. Maybe eventually it can be after years of winning, but getting to Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon level, I just don't see it.
So I was told by another Big Ten football coach that there was really 6 elite programs in all of college football. And it's not necessarily if they're winning right now, but year in, year out, these are the 6 top jobs. And that was Alabama, USC, Texas, Michigan, Ohio State, and Notre Dame. Those are the 6 with the biggest backings that get the most eyeballs per TV view, that have the power of the TV contracts behind it, and why teams fight over those, conferences fight. You wanted the SEC wanted Texas. Illinois, Big Ten wanted USC. There's a reason, right? And then you get past those 6, and from about 7 to 20, you have the other echelon of high-quality football teams, LSU, Oklahoma. I'll put Washington and Oregon in there, right? I'll put Clemson in there. Florida State, Florida, who have had good teams at times, right? Georgia, for sure. Georgia may be trending to the top 6, even closer to that. Tennessee, right? Penn State would be in that. Nebraska at one time was in that. I'm not sure they're in that 7 to 20 range right now. Wisconsin at a time had gotten kind of close to that 7 to 20 range. And so when you look at the landscape of college football, that's the big picture. Nebraska, not there. Penn State has been in that range, but since Joe Pa's teams in the 80s and his 1994 undefeated team, which I say did get robbed of a national championship in the Pull era, they really haven't had the dominant players that they used to have and would beat Miami and teams like that in upsets. That's all college football history for you. We broke it down for you.
Yeah, not a lot of great games in the Big Ten this week. Oregon at Wisconsin, maybe Nebraska, USC. Not much going on. Ohio State's at Northwestern, Penn State at Purdue. But in 2 weeks, Jay, we have number 8 Indiana at number 2 Ohio State.
Right.
What do you think of that matchup?
Well, before the Michigan game, we had not seen Indiana be tested at all.
That's right.
They've really averaged 40 points a game. Their defense had given up like under 20 a game. I mean, really just astounding numbers. I saw a graphic the Big Ten Network provided that their numbers and margin of victory were eerily similar to the 2023 Michigan team numbers as far as margin of victory that really dominated everybody they played. Michigan dominated everybody they played last year. And so, but what we saw, we have not seen pressure on Curtis Rourke all year until we played Michigan, and he had a ton of pressure, and stuff started to break down, and they were a special teams play away from really not winning that football game, and they were able to get that win and found a way to win.
Or a Michigan quarterback away.
Or a Michigan quarterback, although, Jack Tuttle's no longer even playing. Hopefully he gets better. But, Michigan quarterback as always. But when I look at this Ohio State Indiana game, can Indiana win? For sure. Ohio State hasn't dominated offensively like they've dominated in years past. They've won a lot of grudge matches. We saw 20-13 against Penn State. It was a little bit of a shootout against Oregon. There was one other game that they didn't really win by as much as I thought they would win. I can't necessarily remember the opponent they were playing, but we haven't seen Chip Kelly and Ryan Day put up the 30, 40, 50 points a game. And I do think Will Howard's good. Do I think he's CJ Stroud? No. Do I think he's Justin Fields in college? No, I don't. Do I think he's probably closer to Kyle McCord level? Yes, I do. And I think that's the issue. They have weapons on the outside as they always do at receiver. But I probably see this game being more like a 21-14 game going to Ohio State. I know that's not a very ballsy pick, right? Mm-hmm. But when I look at the tape, you think that Ohio State, would they maybe look ahead to Michigan, a team they haven't beaten in 3 years? We took advantage of that in 2007. We played them right before Michigan. I think that was always an advantage. So
let me tell Ohio State, I don't think you're going to have a lot of issues.
Right. So there you go.
They struggled to put away Nebraska.
Well, a lot of issues to play Michigan. Yeah.
With Michigan, I don't think they're going to have a lot of issues.
But I'll quote the great Stanley Jackson, quarterback of the 1990s for Ohio State. He says, I'll tell you a bunch of teams that Ohio State was favored to beat Michigan, and then they didn't beat Michigan. So there's definitely a thing where when Michigan's the underdog in that rival, they seem to win. Now, from 2006 to – what was it, 2020? They didn't lose or something. I mean, they lost one time maybe in 2010. That's pretty good.
All right, just a few random things to throw at you, Jay. I was looking, through some of the NFL draft stuff just to see where Illinois guys were. By the way, PFF did not have a Michigan State player in their big board. They had Zachary Franklin and Pat Bryant. So just Michigan State doesn't have maybe some of that talent they had in previous years. But Pat Bryant on ESPN was the number 51 overall prospect in the draft, number 9 wide receiver.
Wow.
So I've kind of thought of him as maybe third or fourth round or something like that. But do you think he is the best NFL draft prospect on this team? Because I was going to ask you for your top 5. Would it start with Pat Bryant?
I would probably start with Pat. I got to tell you, I'm not great at evaluating tackles, but J.C. Davis has been good. Yeah. So it's I know, I try to talk to the scouts when I'm on the field in Illinois. Who you looking at? J.C. Davis was one of them. I know that. And so he's a guy, I think, that he's not a massive tackle. And that's why he was in, a group of 5. He's not that massive like you see. So you're like, does he get kind of swallowed up just because of his size? Does he move really well? Yeah. So I do think Pat Bryant's probably number 1. And boy, he's done himself a lot of favors this year. I mean, as far as how he plays the game, contested catches, his hands take another level, the way he blocks and what he does after the catch, and catching the ball in critical times. He had a lot of critical catches in crunch time this year that have led to Illinois victories. So I think Pat Bryant's number 1, J.C. Davis number 2. You're asking for a top 5?
Yeah. I think the wild cards here are Xavier Scott and Gabe Akis, right? The 2 guys who are potential early entry guys, but are they guys that you feel confident would be top 100 guys? I'm not quite sure, but they're going to be in that mix, I would imagine.
Yeah, so I had Zachary, Gabe, and Xavier Scott. Where they end up, I don't know, based on how they work out. If you would have told me Tip Ryman would be like the 81st pick at this point, I probably would have said no, right?
Yeah, no Isaiah Williams getting drafted and Tip Ryman in the 3rd round would have been a pretty
Casey
big shot.
Washington in the 6th round, right? Or something like that. I mean, we didn't think Casey would even get drafted. So I see Zachary. Somebody's going to fall in love with Zachari's tape. They're going to look at it and say, man, this guy is super, super productive. We've got to get him on here. I think Gabe, he's going to have a discussion with Brett. Do I think Gabe can be an NFL draft pick? Yes. I think he could really help himself if he came back one more year.
That'd help Illinois too.
That would help Illinois. That would help us, Gabe. And you have to wonder how much Keith Randolph's situation plays into that with him, because Keith thought he would get drafted and did get a decent bonus for being a free agent, but didn't make a team, so that I don't know where, maybe he did now, but not initially, didn't make a team.
Yeah, I don't think he is.
And, Xavier Scott, there's going to be a question about injuries. I mean, it just always is. It's like, can he play a full season, right? One thing that's interesting that Curt Cignetti, you asked me this question maybe last week. What is different about Curt Cignetti? How is he able to do this? And one thing I forgot to say, which he said, is when I look for people in the portal or players, I look for not people with potential. I want people that have played 12 games, a whole season, and been productive, because that tells me about the character of who they are, right? That's why I think that Pat Bryant's done, right? He's done it game in and game out. Now, I think Xavier Scott could be that guy, but he's been banged up. And I think, like it or not, if you're not healthy, you can't play in the NFL. And so that is a negative towards you when you talk about snap counts.
One guy you haven't mentioned that I thought coming into the year has as much NFL like twitch, size, length is Seth Coleman. And just the production consistency has just never really been there, Jay. So like, it's important for him to end the season well, just to have a good jumping off point in the NFL.
Yeah, Seth's a great kid, right? Great leader, and high character kid, and has certainly always looked the part. Has come back from some big injuries as well, but has been healthy this year. It seems like he gets a ton of pressures, but sometimes just doesn't finish when you want him to finish. And so I have no doubt that he'll be in a camp. He'll get his shot, and if he produces, he'll be there. So, I think Seth could do himself a lot of favors by finishing strong.
All right. Last thing for you, Jay. I'm going to give you 3 things. Grade the Illinois season if they win the final 3 games. How would you grade it?
I think you got to give an A for this season. 9 wins after last year. I mean, I think you'd be A+ doing cartwheels if it was 10 wins and a playoff berth. But I think you got to give an A to this coaching staff to say, hey, we did it. We won 9 games. That would put you probably in the top 6 or 7 of the Big Ten. If you won 9 games, I mean, you kind of
be a top 10 season in Illinois history, Jay.
Top 10 season. It's the first time they've had 9 wins since 2007. So, I mean, you got to say that for what they had and what they came back from, getting momentum back in this program rebuild would be huge.
All right. They win 2 more games, 2 out of the last 3. How would you grade the season?
I'm going to give it a B to B+, because I feel like 8 wins is good, but you feel like you didn't maybe finish as good. You go down to 7 wins and
it's amazing. If you told me like 7 wins before the season, I would have said B, but the way you started 6-1.
Yeah, we're going to have to say C+ on that, right? I mean, it's certainly not a D or a failing grade, because we're doing better than what we've usually done. And, I just think we've got to be better at finishing. Now, some of that is a depth issue. We just don't have the depth at certain positions. We're going to see that at the linebacker position. We just don't have the depth that maybe we would want when we can roll guys in. And that's really where some of these teams start to take advantage of stuff, where they have the ability to, roll in guys where guys are banged up and not really miss that much of a beat.
Well, J Leman, thank you for answering all these questions, a potpourri, if you will, everything, a hodgepodge, but we appreciate it. You always make us football smarter. We'll talk to you next week, man.
I'm excited about, listen, guys, in 19 days, we'll be done with our last regular season football game. We'll know. It's only 19 days, guys, right? 19 days. So don't just all go to basketball season yet. I know Yakashonis is the man. I know he's like nobody else. We got to stick with the football team. Don't jump ship yet. Let's go.